Who's first? Councillor Kushner?
Thank you very much, Convener, and thank you to colleagues. It's a pleasure, as always, to be here before this committee, and my thanks to the ladies for their presentation today and the work of the Scottish Women's Budget Group in preparing this report. I think, unfortunately, Convener, we feel that we've been vindicated in our criticisms of the Citizens' Assemblies approach. We, after all, tried to defund this project, I think, at least 3 times. And it is unfortunate, but I think that we were correct in our criticisms of this spend and of this approach. What we have is 96 recommendations just for this council, and again, as we've seen in other parts of the country that have done Citizens' Assembly style approaches, such as Northern Ireland, this was the issue there, that you have many recommendations, much of which we don't have responsibility for and we're going to struggle to implement. We would have much rather have seen fewer recommendations with more of a concrete proposal behind them, so that we could focus on areas which we can accurately and effectively target to look to reduce inequality, improve opportunity, and work to tackle relative poverty in our city. So while there are some recommendations, as we said in our amendment, that we want to prioritise and focus on, I do think, unfortunately, we've been vindicated in our past criticisms of this spend. Our amendment, Convener, recognises the work of the report, and the participants obviously gave up their time to participate. It is ultimately up to us as elected councillors what we need to go forward with, and it's quite appropriate for us to seek to take out any recommendations that we do not, on this side of the chamber, think that we should be going forward with. It is ultimately up to politicians, elected politicians, to decide. Advisors advise, and we are entitled to make these decisions. That's why we're saying, let's focus on where the priorities, and we've heard that in terms of childcare and, you know, safety and various other aspects. So we're not saying let's not do nothing. We're saying let's prioritise, because we have limited financial resources, we have limited resources in terms of staff, so we need to be laser focused on prioritising to make sure that we best benefit our citizens who most need the council's help. In terms of the positives, in terms of the report, I think, you know, the holistic approach has been helpful, because as we've heard today, and as all elected members will know, people's own challenges can be diverse and can be impacted by small actions in their life which lead on to suffering from relative poverty, as we know, Convener, from representing Tory and the work of the GP practice and the RGU law clinic there, when they talk about, quite often, you know, someone might have a problem with their washing machine and they might not have the money to repair it, they don't know how to get access to services, and the fallback or the kickback that that has for them and their work if they're not able to wash their clothes. So we see that approach across our city, so I welcome the holistic approach. I think, as we've spoken about in this committee as well, the data is important, and as Mr Murchie would talk about the granularity, a phrase which I think I've taken on board as an important reflection of making sure that we've not just got the high level data, but we've got data across our city, so we know where best to target our support. So welcome focus on data, and our amendment says that we should be looking again at our data, making sure we've got as much data that can be used effectively as possible. I think the comments in terms of the council and how it interacts with the general public are important and reflect, you know, broader concerns amongst the general public. Sometimes it is a perception. We do certainly need to be moving forward with a digital first approach. Yet that should not mean that people cannot come into Marshall College and speak with people, because we all have constituents who have faced problems in getting access to services. So digital first, positive, should hopefully free up more resources, but we need to have that targeted approach to people who need it. As a parent, as someone who's paying more than my mortgage in terms of childcare, I think the childcare mapping is an important exercise. And the suggestion, certainly in terms of trying to incentivise people to become childminders, is a positive step, because certainly the resource across the city is it depends on what you can pay and where you are. Also, I think the reflection that for people who are working, you know, you go from a nursery which has wraparound hours to a school which, you know, you can't drop your child off before 8 o'clock, you've got to pick them up before 4 o'clock. It doesn't work with people's working hours, and that's an important reflection and something I think we should be looking at as a council and as a society. I think the reflection on in-work poverty and benefits is important. You know, I think it's about £59.9 billion a year we're spending on in-work benefits, and the stats are about 38% of people on universal credit in Scotland are in work. I would have liked to have seen more of a focus in terms of talking to the UK government about that, because work should always pay, but we've chosen to focus on the hostile environment. So, you know, we have prioritised certain aspects over others, which I don't think is as politically neutral as I would have liked it. There is certainly somewhat of an agenda there because we have focused on certain aspects of that. As we say, I do think there is an agenda in terms of where we're going in terms of this. We've talked about the hostile environment, but the comments in the report are no different from any other country in terms of visa fees. And we, of course, have a policy which is meant to discourage illegal migration, which is correct. There was no commentary in the report about what specific elements of the so-called hostile environment were the issue, you know, because that includes having to provide your passport when you go for a job. It's also about reducing the cost to the NHS. So, you know, if you don't have a right to live and work in the UK, reducing our costs to the NHS. And that is what the majority of countries do, because unfortunately people don't come to this country with a doctor. They don't come with a mile of road. So it is about making sure that we're using our resources correctly. So we don't want to go forward with writing to the UK government about the hostile environment. We certainly should be taking all steps to reduce illegal immigration, which is generally supported by the public at large. Moreover, we don't want to go forward with the translation of benefit leaflets into countless other languages other than English. We already have a requirement under the Equality Act to provide translation services if required. What we shouldn't be doing is baking into our system the ability not to have to learn English, so that we're providing leaflets in other languages which are not the predominant language of this country, which is certainly not something that other countries are doing across the world. So, Convener, you know, what we have said is we need to prioritise in terms of where we're going. We want to take forward various aspects of this report and have officers come back to them. Yet, what we don't want to do is prioritise certain elements which we think are not the most effective use of taxpayers' money, which we need to be the custodian of. So let's take forward elements of this report in terms of childcare, where we can see what we can do in terms of our mapping, in terms of what we can do to access for services. The same in terms of benefits, and I sit on the board of the Citizens Advice Bureau, and I know the work that they do in maximising people's access to benefits, especially where they're in work. So we want to see that good work continuing alongside the data elements to ensure that we have that data so that we can look after our citizens and know where those targets are. And Convener, I would like to see some support across the chamber for this, because ultimately it is up to us as elected members to decide what to take forward, and I look forward to receiving the report from the director and his team in due course.
Thank you,